He would come to be recognized as one of America's most formidable opponents during the Pacific War. As the leader of Japan's desperate last stand on the island of Iwo Jima, this general would come to inflict devastating casualties on invading US forces. Today, we're looking at the life, military career and medals of Tadamichi Kuribayashi, and we're going to do it right here in his hometown. Iwo Jima would become the only major battle in the Pacific War where American casualties exceeded Japanese. On this tiny volcanic island, over 26,000 US servicemen, mainly Marines, would become casualties. For many leathernecks in World War II, Iwo Jima would be remembered as one of the hardest battles they ever fought. So who was this Japanese commander whose strategy inflicted so much punishment on the Americans? Let's leave Tokyo now and find out. We're going to go to his hometown. Tadamichi Kuribayashi was born in July 1891 in Matsushiro, an historic castle town in Nagano Prefecture. Matsushiro is roughly just over 130 miles or so from Tokyo and takes about an hour and a half to 2 hours on the Shinkansen or bullet train. You will have to get a bus from Nagano Station to Matsushiro. Once the seat of the Sanada clan during the Edo period, Matsushiro is known for its strong samurai traditions, well-preserved castle district and military heritage. Although Matsushiro was an independent town during Kuribayashi's lifetime, nowadays it's been absorbed into the larger nearby city of Nagano. Kuribayashi came from a family with deep aristocratic roots. Kuribayashi's samurai ancestors served under the Sanada clan, who were lords of the Matsushiro domain. The Sanada clan's main base of power in the region was the Matsushiro castle, and the ruins are behind me, as you can see. Kuribayashi's ancestors would likely have visited this castle for service, ceremonies, or formal audiences to pay their respects to the Sanada clan. Today, there are well-preserved houses of the actual samurai retainers of the Sanada clan, which are outside the castle itself. But by the time Kuribayashi was born, Japan, in the rush towards modernization, had changed dramatically. So let's head into the castle as we do a quick walk and talk. After the Meiji Restoration and the feudal system was abolished, the local samurai were forced to find alternative employment. Kuribayashi's father worked in lumber and civil engineering after the family initially lost its fortune in banking and in the silk business. At school, the young Kuribayashi stood out for his intelligence and fascination with foreign cultures. Of note, he would also show an independent streak and questioning authority when he organised a strike as a pupil against the school authorities, narrowly avoiding expulsion. As a teenager, he initially had ambitions to become an international correspondent and journalist, but was persuaded by his family and educators to join the army instead. In 1911, graduating from Nagano Middle School, he passed an entrance examination for military academy and entered the Imperial Japanese Army Academy in December 1912. Kuribayashi graduated in May 1914, 125th out of over 700 classmates. This is the town's old railway station. The tracks were taken up and replaced with a car park nowadays. But perhaps when coming home on leave, Kuribayashi would come to this railway station. Upon graduation from the academy, he opted for the cavalry and joined the 15th Cavalry Regiment, commissioned as a second lieutenant in December 1914. In 1917, he entered cavalry school and was promoted to lieutenant. Around 1920, his career would take a positive turn as he would pass an examination for Army Staff College. Graduating from Staff College in 1923, due to his high score, he was later offered the opportunity to study abroad And rather than travel to Europe like most of his fellow officers, instead Kuribayashi chose to study abroad in the United States, arriving in America in 1928. Like Isoroku Yamamoto before him, Kuribayashi studied English and attended courses at Harvard University while serving as a deputy military attaché assigned to observe American society, industry, and military affairs. He would take lodgings with an American family, live in a private home in Buffalo, New York, and spend time attached to the 1st Cavalry Division as an observer. Here, he would study US Army training, doctrine, organisation, and logistics. His experience would leave him with a marked respect for American officers and soldiers, who he saw as competent and disciplined. Kuribayashi would realise that fighting the United States military in any future war would be no picnic. This would be in contrast to many other nationalistic and imperialistic officers in the army in Japan who hadn't travelled very far outside of the country and saw the West as weak and decadent and easy to defeat. And a couple of interesting side notes here. Apparently, Kuribayashi toured the United States whilst he was there by vehicle, supposedly a Chevrolet, after being taught to drive by American officers, some of whom he would remain in contact with long after and form a friendship. Being 6 foot in height, which was extremely tall for a Japanese person of the period, and handsome, Kuribayashi was also a bit of a babe magnet. Apparently, in the period after graduating from Staff College in the 20s, several senior Japanese officers, recognising a promising young man, approached him with offers of their daughter's hand in marriage, but he turned them all down. In December 1923, Kuribayashi would get married to Yoshi and they would have 3 children. In contrast to the party-loving, womanizing Admiral Yamamoto, who we've covered before, Kuribayashi seemed a devoted husband and family man. Returning home from the United States, he would be promoted to major in 1930, and in April of that year, assigned to the Ministry of War. In 1931, he would be sent to Canada to serve as a military attaché at the embassy for about 2 years, and again use that time to study the West. Returning from Canada in 1933 and promoted to lieutenant colonel, he would rise rapidly, and after a stint in the horse management department at the General Staff, he was appointed as commanding officer of the 7th Cavalry Regiment between 1936 and 37. He would then go on to command a cavalry brigade. In 1940, Kuribayashi would be promoted to Major General, and prior to the outbreak of war with America and the Western powers, was appointed Chief of Staff to the 23rd Army, stationed in Guangdong Province in China. In this capacity, Kuribayashi would assist in the planning of the invasion of Hong Kong, which was launched on the same date as Pearl Harbor. During the Japanese attack and subsequent occupation of Hong Kong, war crimes were reported by some units in the 23rd Army, including the massacre of Allied soldiers and medical personnel at St. Stephen's College, and numerous killings and ill treatment of prisoners of war and civilians. Kuribayashi's role in the battle is hard to establish, but it seems he played a more administrative function rather than operational. After falling out with his commanding officer, he would also be sidelined and just given mundane and diplomatic issues to resolve, rather than commanding any troops. He was noted, however, for visiting wounded Japanese soldiers in hospital, which was quite rare at the time for senior Japanese officers to do, and it highlighted his more humane side. In mid-1943, he would be promoted to Lieutenant General and was transferred back to Tokyo and given command of the 2nd Imperial Guards Division. This was primarily a reserve training and replacement division rather than a combat one, but it was a prestigious posting. Responsibilities would include organising military ceremonies in the capital, as well as providing physical security and protection for locations and sites related to the Imperial Palace, ultimately the Emperor's home domain. Being posted near the flagpole, so to speak, would give Kuribayashi greater chance for interaction with senior officers and even on occasion the Emperor. During late 1943, as the war turned against Japan, it is believed Kuribayashi may have become increasingly outspoken in those military circles against the war. This put a mark on him as being perceived as defeatist. Clearly a man devoted to his country, there is speculation that Kuribayashi was selected for essentially a one-way ticket to command the Iwo Jima garrison, as he had appeared in the crosshairs of the military elite, including Tojo. Advocating a negotiated surrender, he was seen as a defeatist. In a letter to his wife, he would state, "The United States is the last country in the world Japan should fight." Although Kuribayashi was seen as potentially defeatist for wanting a negotiated surrender, he still had a reputation as a military commander as reliable, dependable, and honourable. In May 1944, he was selected to command the 109th Division, the main formation for the defence of Iwo Jima. Why was this island so important? By 1944, Iwo Jima had become one of the most strategically crucial islands in the Pacific. Sitting roughly halfway between the Mariana Islands and mainland Japan, it served as an early warning station capable of detecting incoming American B-29 bombers and acting as a base for Japanese fighters attempting to intercept them before they reached the home islands. The island itself was a small volcanic outcrop of just over 21 square kilometres and covered in jagged volcanic rock, black ash, porous sand and sulphur vents, dominated by Mount Suribachi at its southern tip. Today, Iwo Jima is a restricted military area and remains largely off the beaten track for tourists. You'll see some footage here of a recent visit I took to Sakurajima, a volcanic island in southern Japan, and I experienced a landscape here that may offer loosely some sense of what the defenders of Iwo Jima endured. The terrain was covered in black volcanic rock and fine ash that quickly found its way into your lungs, while the loose, porous sand would have made digging trenches or moving heavy equipment incredibly difficult. On the day I visited, Sakurajima even produced one of its frequent minor eruptions, filling the air with the unmistakable smell of sulphur. Even after a couple of hours, it starts to aggravate the back of your throat, so it's hard to imagine what it must have been like for Kuribayashi's garrison, who spent months tunnelling through the volcanic ground and living in that oppressive environment as they prepared for the inevitable American invasion. Before leaving for Iwo Jima, Kuribayashi received several briefings, where he was instructed to hold the island for as long as possible and inflict the greatest possible amount of casualties on the anticipated invading Americans. Kuribayashi would understand that there would be little chance of reinforcement or relief. When Prime Minister Tojo selected him for the command, Tojo told Kuribayashi, "Become another Kusunoki Masashigi." This was a 14th century samurai who died in loyal service in battle for the emperor. Lack of water was a constant headache on Iwo Jima. The island had no natural fresh water supply, and what little water was available was often brackish and tainted by volcanic minerals, earning it the grim nickname amongst the troops of Devil's Water. Rainwater had to be collected in cisterns, and every drop was carefully rationed. One Japanese private, as part of the garrison, recalled, "One water bottle per day was the most we ever had to drink." Unlike many other senior officers, Kuribayashi chose to share in the hardships endured by his men. To set an example, he reportedly limited himself to just 1 cup of water a day for washing. This is barley tea, a local delicacy. Finding access to decent drinking water on Iwo Jima was a constant problem. He once wrote, "There is no spring water here, so we must do with rainwater. I long for a glass of cold water, but nothing can be done." Kuribayashi would command a garrison on the island of between around 22 to 24,000 men. Approximately 1/3 or so, about 7,500, were navy. The rest, primarily part of the Imperial Japanese Army's reinforced 109th Division. Kuribayashi would be given command of all forces on the island. On arrival, he quickly made an assessment of the defences and decided on a doctrine of defence in depth. He studied the defence of Peleliu, where focus on inland defence and not contesting the beaches was seen to preserve Japanese strength and inflict greater casualties on the enemy. In August 1944, Kuribayashi wrote to his wife referring to the Zenkoji Temple in Nagano. The city's most famous temple, it's likely Kuribayashi visited it many times during his childhood. The temple still stands today, as you can see, and he wrote to his wife, "There are so many flies that they get into your eyes and your mouth. There are ants everywhere, like the pilgrims moving en masse to Zenkoji Temple, and they come crawling up all over your body, lots of them at once. There are cockroaches too, filthy grotesque insects all over the place. The only good news is that there aren't any poisonous insects or snakes. For food, there are a few wild papayas and bananas, but so many soldiers picked them that there are now none left. It's a piping hot volcanic island. Vegetables don't really grow here." Long before the Americans landed, Kuribayashi knew that he was likely to die on Iwo Jima. In September, he again wrote to his wife, "It must be destiny that we as a family must face this. Please accept this and stand tall with the children at your side. I will be with you always." In Kuribayashi's hometown lies the Zozan Underground Imperial Headquarters, a vast network of tunnels carved into the mountainside during the Second World War. The tunnels were constructed here from around 1944 in anticipation of an Allied invasion of Japan and the need for a command centre outside of Tokyo. Hundreds of labourers, the majority of them Koreans conscripted into forced labour, died constructing the complex. There's a certain irony in finding one of Japan's largest underground military complexes here, given that Kuribayashi would later become synonymous with perhaps the most famous tunnel system of the entire Pacific War on Iwo Jima. Whether by coincidence or not, his hometown ended up with its own labyrinth beneath the hills. Thankfully, this one is a little easier to visit than Iwo Jima. While Zozan wasn't built to the same scale or for the same purpose, walking through these narrow passages does give you a sense of what fighting or living in a fortified underground world might have felt like. The cramped tunnels, rough-hewn rock, and hidden chambers offer a glimpse, however imperfect, into the sort of environment Kuribayashi and his men transformed Iwo Jima into, where an entire battlefield disappeared beneath the surface. Just walking down these tunnels feels claustrophobic, and it's a bit of an effort even for a middle-aged man with a sunburn and a hangover. So God knows what those chaps at Iwo Jima went through. His men would spend months constructing miles of underground tunnels, connecting a labyrinth of pillboxes, artillery positions, and underground cave complexes. Iwo Jima would literally become a human anthill. Some of these tunnels would be dug incredibly deep. The naval headquarters would be 90 feet below ground. These tunnels are surprisingly cool, but at Iwo Jima, the men laboured and fought in tunnels up to 50 degrees Celsius, infested with insects and stinking of sulphur and sulphuric fumes. Kuribayashi would quickly dismiss officers who did not share his vision or who were underperforming. Conditions on the island were brutal. One Japanese private recalled, "Our hands were covered in blisters. Our shoulders got stiff and we gasped and panted in the geothermal heat. Our throats would smart, but there was no drinking water to be had." From the late summer of 1944 American air raids on Iwo Jima became increasingly relentless. By the end of the year, the island had effectively been isolated by the US naval and air forces, leaving the garrison cut off from regular supplies. The defenders would be increasingly aware that they were on their own. The Japanese defenders believed once Iwo Jima fell to the Americans, the way was clear for the enemy to carry out a sustained and heavy bombing campaign over Japan. For Kuribayashi, every day his garrison could hold out bought time against these American air raids. He wrote, "The enemy may land on this island soon. I want to defend this island as long as possible and delay the enemy air raids on Tokyo. Please take care of our children after my death." Incredibly, in the 8 months before the invasion, US aircraft dropped more than 6,800 tons of bombs on the island. During the raids, the Japanese defenders lived a subterranean existence, emerging only to repair positions or move supplies. To prepare his soldiers for the fighting, Kuribayashi composed 6 courageous battle vows, which were widely distributed amongst his men. It stated, "We shall defend this island with all our strength to the end. We shall fling ourselves against the enemy tanks, clutching explosives to destroy them. We shall slaughter the enemy, dashing in among them to kill them. Every one of our shots shall be on target and kill the enemy. We shall not die until we have killed 10 of the enemy. We shall continue to harass the enemy with guerrilla tactics, even if only one of us remains alive." Kuribayashi would term his men as the Courage Division. Historian Kumiko Kagahashi, I hope I pronounced that right, would say of Kuribayashi, "He wasn't a standard military man who saw soldiers as pawns." In his instructions, he forbade reckless banzai charges and stated, "The strength of each of you is the cause of our victory. Soldiers of the Courage Division, do not crack at the harshness of the battle and try to hasten your death. We will finally prevail if you make the effort to kill just 1 man more. Die after killing 10 men, and yours is a glorious death on the battlefield." For Kuribayashi, effectively delaying and then killing the enemy were priorities. By his men digging in and digging deep, he hoped to neutralize the American advantage in overwhelming firepower. By motivating his men and leading by example, incredibly, even though they were subjected to almost daily air raids and then naval bombardments, the 450 defensive positions that had been in place originally had increased under Kuribayashi's leadership to 750 just before the US landing. Kuribayashi cared about his men and would discourage needless sacrifice. He would also share their conditions, having the same rations and water as the men, and spending much of the battle living in the same conditions, in the underground tunnel complexes. Finally, on the 19th of February, American forces, spearheaded by the US Marines, stormed the beaches in an amphibious assault. The Americans expected to secure the island within 5 days. They would be in for a shock. Instead of meeting the invaders at the water's edge, Kuribayashi held his fire, allowing thousands of Marines to concentrate onto the exposed beaches before unleashing the full weight of his concealed artillery, mortars and machine guns. The result was devastating, with the landing beaches transformed into a killing ground within minutes. As the Marines advanced, rather than banzai charges, they encountered well-coordinated counterattacks by the Japanese. US tanks were put out of action by mines, specialist squads, or well-camouflaged anti-tank guns, and the Americans were subject to constant artillery, mortar and small arms fire. Japanese positions had to be taken by direct ground assault or by sealing off entrances. Here's one example of just how hard the fighting was. After 9 days, the US drive to the north had only progressed 4,000 yards, at a cost of incredibly 7,000 casualties. A Japanese survivor, Private Abe, recalled, "We were forced to spare rations for battle, and we foraged around for edible weeds. As the US Marines doggedly cracked on with their mission, the final weeks and days of the battle would become a brutal contest of endurance. Marines fought relentlessly, clearing the island yard by yard, bunker by bunker, and tunnel by tunnel. Kuribayashi's garrison displayed extraordinary tenacity and courage, emerging from hidden positions to launch fierce counterattacks before disappearing back into the labyrinth below. One Japanese military doctor who spent 57 days in the tunnels recalled, "So we sucked on papaya roots, dandelion leaves, and moss. When the Marines fired gas into the tunnel, we made masks of bandages, soaked in urine to protect our lungs. In the final days, our bodies could produce neither urine nor saliva." By the end, the Japanese defenders were starving, dehydrated, and exhausted. A Japanese officer who commanded the Iwo Jima radio station later wrote, "General Kuribayashi commanded his battle under candlelight, without a single rest or sleep, day after day. Radio broadcasts, newspapers and magazines from Japan encouraged him throughout, especially when the old and young men, boys and girls of his native place prayed to God for his victory." On the 17th of March, Kuribayashi sent his farewell message to Imperial headquarters, accompanied by 3 traditional death poems, which, according to author Stewart, were in effect a subtle protest against the military command that so readily sent men to their deaths. That evening, Kuribayashi and about 400 surviving men under him prepared for the final stages of the battle. Grasping the pommel of his sword with his left hand, Kuribayashi made a speech. His final recorded address to his men stated, "Even if you have to eat grass, bite the earth, or throw yourselves on the ground, I believe that you will fight and in doing find a way out of this fatal situation. With things as they are, each one of you must kill 100. There is nothing else for it. I believe in your devotion. Please do as I do." All men in the headquarters cave were presented with 1 cup of sake and 2 cigarettes as a gift from the Emperor. They would keep fighting from their positions. On the 22nd of March 1945, he signalled mainland headquarters, and he would state, "The enemy suggested we surrender," through loudspeaker, but our officers and men just laughed and paid no attention. And then the next day, on 23rd of March, Kuribayashi radioed a final message. It simply said, "All officers and men of Chichijima and adjacent island, goodbye from Iwo." Although Kuribayashi's body was never formally identified, it's believed he may have been killed by artillery whilst leading a final assault. I've heard a story that during his final attack on the Americans, Kuribayashi chose to fight alongside his remaining men as an equal, and stripped all rank insignia from his uniform before the assault. Therefore, his body may have been mistaken as a regular Japanese soldier and not identified. Others state he was hastily buried by his men after his death. Impressed by his leadership and fearlessness as an opponent, the US Marines did try to locate his body in order to give him a burial with full military honours, but were unsuccessful. Kuribayashi would posthumously be promoted to general. He would be remembered as an intellectual and thoughtful officer who shared in his men's hardships and led from the front, and with real courage, grit, and integrity. US General Holland Smith would state, "Of all our adversaries in the Pacific, Kuribayashi was the most redoubtable." For thousands of troops stationed on Iwo Jima, the caves would end up as their tombs, which is a pretty horrendous and grim thought. Identifying Kuribayashi's medals has been surprisingly difficult. One of the biggest challenges is that many of the surviving photos of him appear to have been colorized or digitally touched up, altering the ribbon colors of his medals, which makes it difficult. On top of that, some of his decorations were upgraded or awarded posthumously, and obviously there aren't any up-to-date pictures of him wearing all those medals in a uniform or ribbons. Information on his campaign, service and commemorative medals is also difficult for me as a non-Japanese speaker to try and locate. With that in mind, this is my best estimate based on the medals I believe Kuribayashi would most likely have been entitled to receive. Japanese medals are well outside my wheelhouse, so this is by no means definitive, but I have had quite a few requests now for Axis medals. If there are any Japanese military medal experts watching, feel free to give any constructive feedback in the comments if you feel I've missed anything or made any mistakes. Here goes. His medals are Grand Cordon of the Order of the Rising Sun, which was issued posthumously in 1967. Grand Cordon of the Order of the Sacred Treasure, again issued posthumously in 1967. Order of the Golden Kite, second class. The Taisho Enthronement Commemorative Medal, 1915. The Showa Enthronement Commemorative Medal, 1928. The Manchukuo or Manchuria National Foundation Commemorative Medal. The China Incident War Medal, I think that's related to the Marco Polo Bridge incident. The Japanese 1914 to 1920 First World War Medal. The World War I Allied Victory Medal. Also, I've added here the 1941 to 45 Great East Asian War Medal, which was issued in June 1944 by the Japanese government. The 2600th National Anniversary Medal, Commemorative Medal, which was issued in 1940. And finally, the Order of United Glory 6th Class, which was issued by the Chinese puppet government. If you enjoyed this video, do give it a like. It really does encourage me to get out and make more of these travel-style documentaries rather than just staying in the man cave. And if you'd like to go a step further and support the channel, then consider buying a copy of my book, Class of Courage. The Amazon link is in the channel description. Thanks for watching. I hope you found some value from this, and I'll see you in the next one. Hopefully not so sunburnt.